I can't choose which language to study among German, French and Spanish. Which suits the best for what I'm planning to do in the future? Don't forget to subscribe to Lang Explorer to show your support. Not a few people are eager to study a foreign language, but they aren't sure which to choose, because each one is spoken only in a certain geographical area, and you aren't sure what to do there in the future. Aren't you one of those who haven't begun learning a foreign tongue, simply because you don't know which is the most appropriate one for you? Today we'll focus on German, French, and Spanish, which are three major European languages among students, to tell you which one is the most suitable one, on the basis of your interest, on top of showing their features. Choose a language that fits you best, and enjoy discovering a new culture. Among other European languages, German, French, and Spanish are the most commonly learned languages, although there are significant differences among them in terms of difficulty and utility. In this video, we'd like to tell you where each of them is spoken and how easy it is to study it, before addressing its characteristics. There's no absolute best language to learn, and your choice is entirely up to your lifestyle. For example, Finland has a population of only 5.5 million people, and Finnish isn't a handy language in general terms, but it's essential if you work for Nokia or have any other close ties to Finland. On the other hand, while the three languages in this video have relatively more needs, we have to be honest enough to admit that none of them is handy for those who want to be active in Asia. If you plan to work elsewhere, it'll be helpful to have some knowledge of these three languages to a greater or lesser extent, so choose the one that best suits your future goals. First, where each language is spoken. While French and Spanish are widely understood outside of Europe, German is used only in Europe. As for French, it was the lingua franca of the upper classes and the international community until it gave way to English in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But even today, French, rather than English, is the first official language of international organizations established before World War I, such as the Universal Postal Union and the International Olympic Committee, and it's still one of the working languages of the United Nations, together with English. In addition, many international organizations have their headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, where locals speak French. So if you work there, it's helpful to speak French, as it'll enhance your life there. Furthermore, since France used to have vast colonies in Africa, North America, and the Caribbean, among others, French is still widely spoken there. As far as Spanish is concerned, it's spoken not only in Spain but in most Latin American countries except Brazil, where Portuguese is spoken. It's also increasingly important in the United States. Spanish has more than 500 million speakers, and more than 90% of them live in the Americas. Portuguese, which is very similar to Spanish, is spoken not only in Brazil and Portugal, but also in some African countries and Timor-Leste, so Spanish is useful in such countries too. In contrast, German isn't widely used outside of Europe due to the short history of German colonial rule in other continents, and even counting Dutch, which is closely related to German, and Afrikaans, which is a dialect of Dutch, your German will be of little help when you're out of Europe. However, it's very useful when you focus on Europe, as it has more native speakers than any other language within the European Union. German-speaking countries are the locomotive of the European economy, so your German will help you interact with the European manufacturing industry, especially in German-speaking countries. Therefore, your area of activity will vary considerably depending on which of these three languages you choose to study. Roughly speaking, French is for those who want to work in international organizations or in Africa, Spanish is for those who want to work in the Americas, and German is for those who want to focus on Central Europe. Next, let's see which language is easier. On its website, the U.S. Department of State indicates the minimum number of hours of study required for an ordinary American to acquire enough foreign language skills to work as a diplomat. The easiest is Spanish, with 600 hours of study, then French, with 750 hours of study, and German, with 900 hours of study, making it the most difficult of the three languages. Some of you may wonder why German, which shares its Germanic origin with English, is the most challenging language, followed by French, which has provided many loanwords for English, while Spanish, which isn't so closely related to English, is the easiest. In addition to the fact that Spanish has only 5 vowels, the spelling and pronunciation rules are so simple that you can pronounce almost any word correctly if you learn the pronunciation rules in less than an hour. However, French has a much more complex spelling and pronunciation system that takes much longer to get used to. In addition, German is the most difficult because it retains the case declensions that have disappeared in English except for pronouns. English has adopted many loan words from French and Latin since the Middle Ages and is now quite different from German in terms of vocabulary. Next, we'd like to show you the characteristics of these 3 languages when compared to English. The first major difference is that nouns have genders. French and Spanish have only masculine and feminine nouns, while German has the third one, neuter gender. This difference in gender changes the pronouns and adjectives that can be used with the noun, so in order to speak properly and without grammatical errors, it is necessary to pay attention not only to the singular and plural forms but also to the gender of the noun. Some endings of a noun identify its gender, but in many cases, such a rule doesn't exist, so it's necessary to memorize it noun by noun. Second, the conjugation of verbs is complex. Verbs have indicative and subjunctive moods, especially French and Spanish have quite complex tenses, and this is one of the greatest hurdles for those at beginner and intermediate levels. The screen shows you which moods and tenses exist in the 3 languages. Each of these tenses has its own verb conjugations, and you'll need to memorize all of them. Finally, we'd like to briefly show the characteristics of the 3 languages. French has very complex spelling and pronunciation rules, with quite a few exceptions. The consonants at the end of a word are generally silent but are pronounced when followed by a word beginning with a vowel, and this phenomenon is called liaison. Also, other consonants are attached to the first vowel of the following word to form a new syllable, and this phenomenon is called enchaînement. There are also nasal vowels such as en, etc., and you exhale not only from your mouth but also from your nose to pronounce such sounds, which are very distinctive compared to other languages. The French pronunciation differs considerably from that of other Romance languages such as Spanish and Italian, and it isn't very mutually intelligible. Although your knowledge of French helps you understand other Romance languages to some degree, especially Italian, it doesn't exempt you from making efforts to study such languages. Verb conjugations are quite complex, and quite a few letters are written but silent, making them hard to memorize. On the other hand, some tenses are seldom used in contemporary French, while in Spanish, they appear frequently, so the French verb conjugation system is slightly less complex than the Spanish one. Another remarkable feature of French is the existence of 2 unusual pronouns not found in English, German, or Spanish. And is a pronoun for de plus noun, and it has a variety of meanings, depending on the context. On the other hand, is an a plus noun, meaning specifically to somewhere, to something, etc. While some Romance languages have equivalent ones, such as Italian and Catalan, others, such as Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, have no counterparts. So, if you're studying French or Italian, pay attention to these strange pronouns usage. German words have more consonants than English ones, so it's crucial to get used to this pronunciation. Then, there are multiple ways to make plurals of nouns, and some of them have umlaut, which changes the pronunciation of accented vowels. Umlauts also occur in some verb conjugations, in comparative and superlative classes of adjectives, and in those adjectives formed from nouns, which can make the pronunciation quite irregular. Another characteristic of German compared to Romance languages is that it still retains declensions. In German, in most cases, nouns are devoid of declensions, and cases are indicated by changing the definite article, indefinite article, and other elements attached to the noun, so you need to master these declensions and understand their meaning if you want to master German. On the other hand, such declensions give more flexibility to the word order in German, except the verb, which comes in the second place for declarative sentences, at the beginning of a sentence in interrogative sentences without interrogative pronouns, and the end of a sentence in subordinate sentences. Provided that verbs are located in the right place, you can put all the other elements as you like, although there are some exceptions. Note that some German verbs are separable, meaning that the particle of a verb can stay at the end of the phrase while the remainder comes at the first or second place. The verb abreisen, which means depart, is separable in case of a declarative sentence, for instance,
Morgen reist ab.
But that particle
Ab
is together with the remainder
reisen.
when the verb comes at the end of the phrase, for instance.
Gestern ist schon abgereist.
Or,
Ich weiß nicht, wann abreist.
Spanish has a straightforward rule regarding spelling and pronunciation, and you can pronounce even those unfamiliar words correctly. Verb conjugations are undoubtedly complex, but since there are no letters to be written but not to be pronounced like those in French, you just repeat saying verb conjugation list, as it'll help you master. In addition, Spanish nouns are generally masculine if they end with O, and feminine if they end with A, although there are a few exceptions, on top of other endings that are typical of each gender. So you can guess the gender of most words, without the need to memorize the gender of nouns very much. In general, Spanish grammar is somewhat simpler than that of German or French, with the exception of the imperative. Affirmative commands are written as a single word with a pronoun or two after the verb, while they appear as separate words in negative commands. French imperative follows Spanish in terms of the word order, but Spanish differs in the sense that it uses the subjunctive present tense for negative commands without exception, while the specific conjugation of the imperative is used for affirmative commands, depending on the person the command is addressed to. Thus, tell him that is a one-word expression.
Díselo.
Whereas don't tell him that is a four-word expression.
No se lo digas.
Some practices will be necessary so you can say such phrases easily. Now, let's summarize what we've learned today. 1. French is mainly spoken in Africa, and Spanish is primarily spoken in the Americas, while German is basically only spoken in Europe. However, your knowledge of German is helpful if you work with manufacturers in the German-speaking countries. 2. In terms of difficulty, Spanish is the easiest, followed by French, and German is the hardest. 3. Compared to English, the similarities among the three languages are that nouns have genders, and verb conjugations are complex. French and Spanish have masculine and feminine nouns, and German has neuter nouns in addition to these. They also have indicative and subjunctive moods, and verbs are conjugated in complex ways depending on their respective tenses. 4. French has a rather complex relationship between spelling and pronunciation, with
Liaison
and
enchaînement,
as well as nasal vowels. French also has pronouns such as
un,
n,
I.
with no counterpart in English and other languages. 5. German is characterized by the presence of umlaut, which changes the pronunciation of vowels and declensions. On the other hand, it's relatively flexible in terms of word order as long as the position of the verb is kept, but beware of separable verbs. 6. Spanish has simple spelling and pronunciation rules, and in many cases, the gender of a noun can be determined by its ending alone, making grammar relatively easy. However, the imperative form is quite irregular, especially between affirmative and negative commands. Thank you for watching this video. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.